The hunger had eaten through Wendra Oggrin's pride 3 days before she met the man who would change everything, leaving only the hollow ache in her belly and the crumbling heel of bread wrapped in cloth against her chest. She sat beneath a twisted oak where the frontier road forked toward the eastern settlements, green fingers pressed against bark worn smooth by travelers who never stopped for creatures like her. The late autumn sun filtered through bare branches, casting shadows that made her tusks look longer than they were, more monstrous. She had learned to keep her head down when footsteps approached, to make herself small despite the breadth of her shoulders and the obvious color of her skin. Small orcs were less threatening. Quiet orcs sometimes survived. The bread in her shirt had been meant to last until she reached the lumber camps near Greystone, where they sometimes hired orc workers for jobs that broke human backs. 3 more days of walking, the merchant had told her. But that was before the rains came and turned the road to soup, before she had twisted her ankle in a rut and lost a full day limping. Now it was her last food, and Greystone felt as distant as the mountains beyond it. She unwrapped the cloth slowly, reverently. The bread had gone hard at the edges, but the center still held some softness. Her stomach clenched at the sight of it. She broke off a corner and let it soften on her tongue, eyes closing against the relief of it. "Pardon me." Wendra's eyes snapped open. A man stood at the fork in the road, swaying slightly. Human, though it took her a moment to recognize him as such beneath the grime and the hollowness that made his cheeks look carved from wax. He wore the remnants of a good coat, torn at the shoulder and stained with mud and something darker. His hair hung lank and colorless around a face that might have been handsome before hunger, and something worse had eaten it from the inside. "I do not mean to intrude," he said, and his voice carried the careful diction of education despite its roughness. "But have you any water to spare?" She should have said no, should have clutched her bread tighter and waited for him to move on. Instead, she found herself reaching for the water skin at her hip, the one she had filled at the creek that morning. "Here." He took it with hands that trembled, drank deeply, then seemed to remember himself and stopped. "Thank you." His eyes fell to the bread in her lap, and she saw the way his throat worked, saw the hunger that mirrored her own. The sensible thing would have been to put the bread away, to save it for herself, for the long miles still ahead. But there was something in the way he looked at it, something in the careful way he did not ask, that reminded her of her brother in the last days before the fever took him. That same dignified desperation. Wendra broke the bread in half, extended the larger piece toward him. The man stared at it as if she had offered him gold. "I cannot." "You can," she said. "You need it. So do you." His eyes met hers, and she was surprised by their clarity. Blue-gray like winter sky. "That is your last food. Then we both eat." She pushed the bread closer. "Better than watching you fall down in the road." For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then slowly he reached out and took the bread. His fingers brushed hers, warm despite the chill in the air. "I am in your debt. No debt." Wendra bit into her own half, smaller than she had intended it to be. "Just kindness." They ate in silence, 2 hungry creatures beneath an oak tree, and she did not ask what had brought him so low. Did not ask about the old blood on his coat or the way his right hand shook even after he had eaten. When the bread was gone, she licked the crumbs from her fingers and tried not to think about the emptiness still gnawing at her. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Greystone. Lumber camps," he nodded slowly. "Long walk." "Yes. There is a homestead," he said after a moment. 2 miles west. Abandoned mostly. But there is a well, and the roof over the kitchen still holds, if you wanted shelter for the night. She should have been wary. Strange man offering shelter, orc girl alone on the road. But something in his voice carried no threat, only a matching exhaustion. "You live there." "I exist there." A ghost of something that might have been humor touched his mouth. "I am Warren Jennings, former captain of the 3rd Cavalry, currently nothing in particular. Wendra." She did not offer her surname. Orc family names meant little to humans anyway. "What happened?" "That is a long story." He stood, wincing as his weight settled on his left leg. "And not one for an empty road. Come. The least I can do is offer you a roof after you have shared your last meal with me." She should have said no. Should have continued toward Greystone and the promise of work. But her ankle still ached, and the sky promised more rain, and something in Warren Jennings' defeated posture made her think he needed the company as much as she needed the shelter. "All right," Wendra said, and followed him west. The homestead revealed itself gradually through the trees, a cluster of buildings in various states of surrender to time and weather. The main house listed to one side where the foundation had settled, shutters hanging crooked. The barn had lost most of its roof to some past storm. But the kitchen building, separate from the main house in the old style, stood square and solid with smoke rising from its chimney. "My family's land," Warren said, leading her across an overgrown yard. "3 generations of Jennings. My father died 6 years ago. My mother followed him within the year. I was away, serving in the cavalry when they passed. By the time I returned, the place had already started falling apart. Why did you not fix it?" I tried. Then other matters intervened. He pushed open the kitchen door. Inside was sparse but clean, a single room with a hearth, a rough table, and a bedroll in the corner. A few pots hung from hooks. Through a second door she glimpsed the covered walkway that must lead to the main house. "I can offer you the main house for the night. The bedroom is still sound." "This is enough." She lowered herself onto one of the 2 chairs flanking the table. Her ankle throbbed with relief. Better than the road. Warren busied himself at the hearth, coaxing the fire higher. "There is a hen house behind the barn, still has 3 birds. I can make eggs in the morning." "You are giving me more food." Wendra watched him move, noting the careful way he balanced his weight. The left leg, she thought. Old wound, poorly healed. "After I gave you bread. You gave me your last bread." He filled a dented kettle from a bucket and hung it over the fire. "There is a difference. Bread is bread." "No." He turned to face her, and the firelight caught the planes of his face, showing her the man he must have been before whatever had broken him. Handsome in a worn way, perhaps 30 years to her 22. "What you did was more than sharing food. You had nothing, and you gave half of it to a stranger. That is either foolishness or grace, and I am choosing to believe it was grace." Heat crept up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. Just seemed right. Most people do not do what seems right when they are starving. Warren pulled a handful of herbs from a hook and dropped them into the heating water. "Most people look away. Maybe I am a fool then. Maybe." But he smiled when he said it, and the expression transformed his whole face. "I am glad for it either way." They drank the herbal tea when it steeped, weak and bitter but warm, and Wendra felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. Outside, the promised rain began, pattering against the roof with a sound like distant drums. "You can stay until the rain stops," Warren said. "Or longer if you like." "I could use help with the harvest." "What harvest? Your fields are all weeds, the apple orchard." He gestured vaguely toward the west. "My grandfather planted it. 60 trees, half of them still producing. The fruit is ready, but I cannot pick it alone, not with this leg." She should have said no. Should have rested the night and continued on to Greystone. But something in his voice, in the careful way he made the offer as if expecting rejection, made her pause. "What would you pay?" "Half the harvest. We can sell it in Milford, split the coin. And room and board while you work." It was more generous than it should have been. Suspicion flickered. "Why?" "Because you shared your bread with me," Warren said simply. Because I am tired of being alone in this place. Because you need work and I need help, and sometimes things can be simple. Things are never simple for orcs and humans. Then let us be the exception. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the roof. Wendra thought of the long walk still ahead, the lumber camps where orc workers slept in lean toss and ate last. Thought of the apples going to waste while this broken man tried to harvest them alone. "One week," she said, "I help with the harvest, then I go to Greystone." Relief washed over his face so clearly she felt something tighten in her chest. "1 week," Warren agreed. "Thank you." That night, she slept in the main house after all, in a bedroom that still held the ghost of lavender sachets and old perfume. The bed was soft, the blankets clean, and for the first time in weeks, Wendra let herself relax into comfort. Outside, the rain sang against the windows, and she dreamed of apples heavy on branches, waiting to be picked. The orchard was more than Warren had described. The trees stood in neat rows, gnarled trunks thick with age and branches bending under the weight of red and gold fruit. Morning sun slanted through the leaves, dappling everything in honey-colored light. Wendra stood at the edge and felt something unfurl in her chest, something she had thought long dead. "It is beautiful," she said. Warren handed her a basket, their fingers brushing again. "My grandfather said an orchard is a promise. You plant trees you will never see bear fruit, for children you might never meet. Faith made wood." Sounds like a dreamer. He was. My father was practical, kept the accounts and fixed the fences. But grandfather, he believed in making beautiful things just for the beauty of them. Warren looked up into the branches, and sadness ghosted across his face. "I think he would have liked you. He would have liked an orc. He would have liked someone who shares her last bread with strangers." Warren reached up, testing a branch. "Come on. These apples will not pick themselves." They worked through the morning, filling basket after basket with fruit that ranged from perfect to bruised but salvageable. Wendra quickly found her rhythm, her height and strength making it easy to reach branches Warren could not. He showed her which apples to take and which to leave, how to twist the stem just so. They did not talk much, but the silence felt comfortable, punctuated by the soft thump of apples landing in baskets and the rustle of leaves overhead. Around midday, Warren called a halt. They sat in the shade and ate bread and cheese he had brought, along with apples still warm from the sun. The fruit was sweet and crisp, juice running down Wendra's chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand and found Warren watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, you look happy." She considered that. "I am, this is good work. Better than lumber camps, much better." She bit into another apple, savoring it. "Why did you stop taking care of this place? If you love it," Warren's expression closed, the warmth leaving his eyes. "I told you. Other matters intervened." "What matters?" For a long moment she thought he would not answer. He stared out across the orchard, jaw tight. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I served 5 years in the 3rd Cavalry, made captain at 27, youngest in the regiment. I was good at it, reading terrain, reading men. I had a friend, another captain named Silas Garrett. We came up through the ranks together. I trusted him more than anyone." He paused, turning an apple over in his hands. 3 years ago there was a supply contract, a merchant selling grain to the regiment. I noticed discrepancies in the accounts, short deliveries, inflated prices. I reported it to Silas, asked him to help me investigate. Instead, he went to the colonel and accused me of falsifying records to cover my own theft. Wendra felt anger kindle in her chest. "He betrayed you. Completely. He had prepared evidence, forged my signature on documents." The merchant was his brother-in-law. They had been running the scheme for over a year, and I was too stupid to see it until too late. Warren's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I was court-martialed, Dishonorably discharged, lost my rank, my pension, my reputation. No one believed me when I tried to tell the truth. Silas was well liked and I was just the convenient scapegoat. That is not right. No, but it is done. He set the apple down, uneaten. I came back here to disappear, sold off most of the land to pay debts. Stopped caring about the house, the fields. Only kept the orchard because I could not bear to let it die too. Wendra reached out, surprising herself, and laid her hand over his. I am sorry. Warren stared at their joined hands, his son browned and scarred, hers green and strong. Why? You do not know me. I know you are not a thief. I know you offered me shelter when you had no reason to trust me. I know you love this place even though it hurts you. She squeezed his fingers gently. That is enough. When he looked at her, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. You are remarkable, Wendra Oggrin. I am practical. But she did not pull her hand away. And I think your friend Silas is a bastard who deserves to rot. Warren laughed, sudden and surprised, and the sound chased some of the shadows from his face. I think you are right. They finished their lunch and returned to work, but something had shifted between them. Warren told her stories about his grandfather, about learning to climb these same trees as a boy, about the year the late frost killed all the blossoms, and they had no apples at all. Wendra found herself sharing in return small things about her own childhood, about her mother's herb garden and the songs she used to sing. By evening, they had filled 24 baskets and barely made a dent in the harvest. Wendra's shoulders ached pleasantly, her hands sticky with apple juice. Warren cooked dinner that night, eggs and fried potatoes and more apples, baked with honey until they caramelized. They ate at the rough table, and Wendra could not remember the last time food had tasted so good. You could stay longer than a week, Warren said as she helped him wash the dishes. There is more work than just the harvest. The barn needs repair. The fields could be cleared, planted next spring. I cannot pay much, but why do you want me to stay? He went still, hands in the wash water. Because you make this place feel alive again. Because I have been alone so long I forgot what it was like to share a meal with someone. Because when I look at you, I do not see a ruined man staring back. The honesty of it stole her breath. Warren, I know, I have no right to ask. You have your own plans, your own life. But if you wanted to stay, even just a little longer, I would be grateful. Wendra dried the last plate slowly, thinking, Greystone and its lumber camps would still be there in a month, in a year. But this orchard, this broken man trying to rebuild his life, this strange and unexpected peace might not wait. 1 month, she heard herself say. I stay through the harvest and help with the barn, then I decide. The smile that lit Warren's face was worth more than any wage. 1 month. Thank you. The days folded into each other, each one full of work and small discoveries. Wendra learned that Warren sang while he worked, off-key but cheerful, that he was deadly serious about his morning tea but laughed easily the rest of the day, that his hands were clever with repairs, able to coax broken things back to usefulness. Warren learned that Wendra was stronger than she looked, able to heft beams he struggled with, that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, that she was careful with the apples, handling even the bruised ones gently, as if they mattered. They finished the orchard harvest in 10 days. Warren took 3 wagon loads to Milford and returned with a purse of coins that he split evenly despite her protests. You did most of the work, he said. This is fair. With some of the money they bought supplies, lumber and nails for the barn, seeds for spring planting, salt and flour and a ham that they smoked in the chimney. Warren tried to buy Wendra new boots, but she refused, fierce about it until he backed down. The barn repair took longer. They worked side by side, measuring and sawing and hammering until Wendra's palms blistered and healed and blistered again. Warren was patient, showing her how to fit joints properly, how to read the wood grain. When she made mistakes, he just smiled and showed her how to fix them. One afternoon, 3 weeks into her stay, she climbed up to secure a rafter and looked down to find Warren staring at her with such open longing it made her breath catch. When he realized she had noticed, he flushed and looked away, but not before she saw the truth of it. He was falling in love with her. The knowledge should have frightened her, should have sent her packing toward Greystone and safety. Instead, it settled into her chest like a warm stone, heavy and right. Because if she was honest, she was falling too. Had been since that first shared bread, or maybe since he had trusted her with his story. Since he had looked at her not as an orc but as Wendra, and made her want to stay. That night after dinner, they sat outside and watched the stars come out. The air had turned cold, autumn giving way to winter's first warnings. Warren had brought blankets and they sat close for warmth. "I was thinking," Warren said slowly, "about spring, about what to plant. Wheat in the north field maybe, vegetables in the garden plots. My mother used to grow the finest tomatoes in the county. Your mother would be glad to see you caring for this place again. I think she would be glad I am not alone anymore." He turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed. "Wendra, I know you said 1 month. And I will honor that if you want to go, but I hope you will consider staying, not as a hired hand, as a partner. We could work this land together, split everything evenly, build something good here. Why would you offer me that? Because you deserve it. Because this place is too big for one person. Because," he stopped, swallowed. "Because I have not been this happy in 3 years, and it is entirely because of you." She should have asked for time to think, should have been cautious. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I will stay." Warren's whole body sagged with relief. "Truly, truly, I like it here. I like the work. I like—" She stopped, suddenly shy. I like you too." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat racing through her. "More than like, if I am being honest. I know." She smiled at him, let him see the affection in her eyes. "I feel the same." They sat together under the stars, hands clasped, and made quiet plans for the spring. It felt like a promise, Wendra thought, like planting an orchard for children they might never meet. Faith made flesh. Winter arrived properly in the 2nd week of Wendra's 2nd month at the homestead. Snow blanketed the fields, turning the world clean and white. They had prepared well, the barn repaired and stocked with hay they had cut from the overgrown meadows, the kitchen packed with preserved food. Warren had closed up most of the main house against the cold, and they lived primarily in the kitchen building, warm and close. The proximity bred intimacy. They cooked together, washed dishes together, sat by the fire in the evenings and talked for hours. Warren told her about his time in the cavalry, the places he had seen, the men he had commanded. Wendra told him about growing up in a settlement where orcs were tolerated but never welcomed, about watching her brother die because the human healer would not come. "I would have come," Warren said fiercely. "If I had been there, I would have helped. I know." She leaned against his shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her. "You are different, not different, just trying to be decent. Same thing sometimes." They kissed for the first time on a night when the snow fell so thick they could not see the barn from the kitchen window. Warren had been teaching her to play cards, a complicated game with bidding and trumps that she could not quite master. She had thrown down her hand in frustration, and he had laughed, and then suddenly they were looking at each other and the laughter died into something else entirely. "May I?" Warren asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Wendra breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. They took their time learning each other, kisses deepening as the fire burned low. Warren traced the line of her jaw, her pointed ears, with a reverence that made her shake. She ran her fingers through his hair, pulled him closer, felt the thunder of his heart against her palm. "I love you," he whispered against her mouth. "God help me, I love you so much. I love you too." The words felt like coming home. "I did not think I could, but I do." They made love that night in the big bed in the main house, with snow falling outside and the whole world quiet around them. Warren was gentle, attentive, worshipful in his touches. Wendra had never felt so cherished, so wholly seen and wanted. When they finished, they lay tangled together under quilts, and she thought she had never been so happy. "Marry me," Warren said into the darkness. Wendra lifted her head to look at him. "What? Marry me? I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. I want you as my wife. I want to build this life with you properly, with vows and promises." He cupped her face in his hands. "Say yes." She should have been cautious. Should have thought about the complications, the prejudice they would face, the difficulty of an orc and human marriage. But looking into his eyes, she found she did not care about any of it. "Yes," Wendra said. "Yes, I will marry you." Warren kissed her again, deep and claiming, and she tasted joy on his lips. They made plans to marry in the spring, once the roads cleared and they could travel to Milford for a proper ceremony. But the universe, Wendra would learn, rarely let happiness go uncontested. Silas Garrett arrived on a cold day in late January, riding a fine horse and leading 2 soldiers. Wendra saw them coming up the road and called for Warren, her heart already sinking. Warren came out of the barn, took one look at the approaching riders and went pale. "Stay inside," he told her. "No, I stay with you." "Wendra, I stay with you." She crossed her arms, immovable. "Whatever this is, we face it together." He looked at her and something in his face softened. "Together, then." Silas Garrett was a handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered with sandy hair and an easy smile that did not reach his eyes. He dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of the soldiers, and approached with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. "Warren," he said warmly. "It has been too long, not long enough." Warren's voice was ice. "What do you want, Silas?" Straight to business. "I always admired that about you." Silas glanced at Wendra, and she saw the calculation in his gaze, the dismissal. "I am here because there has been a development. The Jennings land has been seized by the Crown for unpaid debts. I have purchased the claim and come to take possession." "That is a lie. I paid off all the debts." "Apparently not all of them." Silas produced a document from his coat. "Your father borrowed money from a merchant company before he died. The debt went into default. I bought it 6 months ago, and it has been accruing interest. You now owe 300 gold pieces or the land reverts to me." Warren snatched the document, read it with growing fury. "This is a forgery. My father never dealt with Blackwell trading. The paperwork says otherwise, and the magistrate has already approved the transfer." Silas smiled, and it was a vicious thing. "You have 1 week to come up with the money or vacate the property. I suggest you start packing." "You bastard!" Warren stepped forward and Wendra grabbed his arm, holding him back. "You framed me once. Now you are stealing my home." "I am not stealing anything. I am simply collecting on a legal debt." Silas turned to remount his horse, then paused. "Oh, and Warren, I would avoid making accusations you cannot prove. Slander is a serious crime, and you are already a disgraced officer. I am sure the magistrate would be happy to lock you up for the trouble." The soldiers followed him down the road, leaving Warren and Wendra standing in the snow. Warren crumpled the document in his fist, shaking with rage and helplessness. "He is lying," Wendra said. "That debt is false." "Of course it is false, but the magistrate is in his pocket and I have no way to prove it." Warren's voice cracked. God, I am so tired of losing to him. Then we do not lose. She took the document from his hand, smoothed it out. We fight. With what? I have no allies, no proof. He has already won. Maybe, but we do not give up without trying. Wendra studied the paper, noting the seal and signatures. This merchant company, Blackwell Trading. Someone had to forge these documents. Maybe they made mistakes. Maybe there is proof here, we just have to find it. Warren looked at her, hope and despair warring in his eyes. Even if we found something, who would believe us? Someone has to. We just need to find the right person. She took his hand, squeezed hard. You shared your home with me when I had nothing, gave me a future. I will not let him steal that. We fight, Warren, together. Slowly he nodded. Together. They spent the next 3 days searching for any evidence that might help. Warren rode to the county archives and found no record of his father ever dealing with Blackwell Trading. Wendra went through every scrap of paper in the house, looking for her father's actual debt records. They questioned old neighbors, but most were too wary of Silas's power to speak openly. It was not until Wendra visited the blacksmith in Milford, bringing apples as a gift, that they caught their first real break. The blacksmith's wife, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, remembered the Jennings family fondly. Your father was a good man, always paid his accounts on time, she told Warren over tea. I remember he was particular about who he did business with, would not deal with anyone he thought dishonest. You remember him mentioning Blackwell Trading? Margaret frowned. Blackwell? No, never. In fact, I am sure he turned down their representative once, said he did not like the smell of their contracts. Would you testify to that? Testify before a magistrate? Margaret looked nervous. I do not know. Captain Garrett has influence, please, Wendra said softly. Warren lost everything because of Silas's lies. Now he is trying to take the last thing Warren has left. If you know the truth, you could help stop him. Margaret looked between them, seeing the desperation and the love. Finally, she nodded. All right, I will testify. Your father was good to us. I owe him that much. They found 2 more witnesses, a merchant and a clerk who had worked with Warren's father and confirmed he had been meticulous about his debts. But they still needed more, some proof that the Blackwell document was forged. It was Warren who had the idea. The seal, he said, studying the document by lamplight. Blackwell Trading has a registered seal with the Crown. If this document is forged, the seal might not match the original. How do we check? The regional tribunal keeps records of all registered seals. If we can get access to their archive, we can compare them. Warren looked up, eyes bright with possibility. But we would need someone with authority to request the information. Wendra thought of the cavalry soldiers who had come with Silas, the way they had looked bored and uncomfortable. What about your old regiment? Are there any officers there you trust? Maybe. Lieutenant Marcus Reed served under me. He was young but honest. If I could get word to him, then we get word to him. Wendra stood decisive. We ride to the garrison tomorrow, explain everything, ask for his help. It was a risk. If Reed refused them, or worse, if he believed Silas over Warren, they would have nothing. But it was the only plan they had. They left before dawn, riding double on Warren's old horse through snow-covered roads. The garrison was a day's ride, a cluster of stone buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. Guards stopped them at the gate, and Warren identified himself, asked for Lieutenant Reed. The guards looked skeptical. Wait here, one said, and disappeared inside. They waited in the cold for nearly an hour before Reed appeared. He was younger than Warren, perhaps 25, with a serious face and the careful bearing of a man trying to prove himself. When he saw Warren, his expression cycled through shock, confusion, and finally something that might have been guilt. Captain Jennings, Reed said formally, I was told you had left the area. I did. I came back. Warren dismounted, helped Wendra down. Reed, I need your help. It is about Silas Garrett. Reed's expression closed. Sir, I cannot involve myself in personal disputes between former officers. This is not a personal dispute. This is fraud. Warren quickly explained about the forged debt, about Silas's attempt to seize his land. I know you do not owe me anything. I know my name is mud in the regiment, but I am asking you to help me prove the truth for once. Just look at the documents. Compare the seals. If I am wrong, I will accept it and go. But if I am right, if you are right, it means Captain Garrett lied. That he framed you. Reed rubbed his face, looking torn. Sir, that is a serious accusation, I know, but I think you already suspect it is true. Reed was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, there have been irregularities. In supply contracts, troop movements, things that did not add up. I reported them to Captain Garrett, and he assured me he would investigate, but nothing ever came of it, because he was behind them. Warren stepped closer. Reed, help me prove it, not just for my sake, but for the regiment, for every soldier who depends on honest officers. Reed looked between Warren and Wendra, weighing something. Finally, he nodded. All right. I will request the seal records from the tribunal. It will take a few days. Where can I send word? The Jennings homestead, 2 miles west of the Eastern Fork. Warren clasped his hand. Thank you. You do not know what this means. I hope I am not making a mistake, sir. They rode back through the gathering dark, hope and fear mixing in equal measure. 3 days until Silas's deadline. 3 days to prove the fraud or lose everything. Reed sent word on the second day. The seal on the Blackwell document did not match the registered seal. It was a forgery, and he had taken the information to the regional tribune, a Crown official with authority over the magistrate. The Tribune had ordered an investigation and summoned both Warren and Silas to appear before a military court. The hearing was held in Milford's courthouse, a stone building that smelled of old paper and anxious sweat. Warren wore his old uniform, cleaned and mended but still showing its age. Wendra sat in the gallery, her hands clenched in her lap, and watched as the tribunal assembled. The tribune was an older man, gray-haired and stern, with the ribbons of long service on his chest. He listened as Reed presented the evidence, as Margaret and the other witnesses testified, as Warren explained the original frame-up and the pattern of Silas's deceptions. Silas defended himself smoothly, claiming ignorance, suggesting Warren was mentally unstable and inventing conspiracies. But when the Tribune compared the seals side by side and called the magistrate to explain why he had approved an obviously forged document, cracks began to show. The magistrate, sweating, admitted he had not examined the seal closely, that Captain Garrett had assured him everything was in order. The Tribune turned his cold gaze on Silas. Captain Garrett, you will surrender your commission and submit to investigation for fraud and conspiracy. If found guilty, you will face imprisonment and restitution. Silas's smooth confidence shattered. You cannot do this. I have served faithfully. You have served yourself. You are dismissed. The Tribune turned to Warren. Captain Jennings, based on the evidence presented, the court finds that you were wrongfully accused and discharged. Your rank and honors are hereby restored, and you will receive back pay for the 3 years you were unjustly deprived of your commission. The claim against your land is voided. You have the tribunal's apology for the grave injustice done to you. Warren stood frozen as if he could not believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, he saluted. Thank you, sir. Wendra felt tears streaming down her face. Around her, people were murmuring, some in approval, some in shock. She pushed through the crowd to reach Warren, and when she did, he caught her up in his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. We did it, he whispered into her hair. "God, we actually did it. You did it. You and your honor and the people who remembered the truth." "No." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "We did it. You told me to fight. You believed in me when no one else did. This is your victory, too." They rode back to the homestead that evening, exhausted and giddy with relief. The land was theirs, truly theirs now, with no shadow hanging over it. Warren's name was cleared, his rank restored. They had won, but more than that, they had proven something. That truth could win. That love and loyalty could stand against corruption. That an orc girl and a disgraced soldier could build something worth fighting for. Spring came gently that year, the snow melting into mud and then green shoots. Warren and Wendra worked the land with new energy, planting wheat and vegetables, repairing the last of the broken fences. The apples blossomed early, covering the orchard in white flowers that smelled like honey. They married on a warm day in April, in the orchard under the blooming trees. Lieutenant Reed stood as Warren's witness, and Margaret from Milford stood as Wendra's. The local priest, an old man who cared more about kindness than species, performed the ceremony without judgment. Warren wore his dress uniform, the ribbons and insignia restored. Wendra wore a simple green dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. When the priest asked if they would pledge their lives to each other, they answered together, voices strong and certain. "I will," Warren said, slipping a simple gold band onto Wendra's finger. "I will share every tomorrow with you." "I will," Wendra echoed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Every tomorrow together." They kissed under the apple blossoms, and their small gathering cheered. Later, they feasted on roasted chicken and fresh bread and apple pie that Margaret had baked. Reed told stories about Warren's time in the cavalry, the brave and foolish things he had done. Wendra laughed until her sides ached, seeing this side of her husband she had not known. As evening fell and their guests departed, Warren took Wendra's hand and led her through the orchard. The setting sun turned everything golden, the blossoms glowing like captured light. "You remember the day we met?" Warren asked. "When you shared your last bread with me, of course." "I thought you might die in the road if I did not feed you. I might have. I was that far gone." He stopped under the oldest tree, the one his grandfather had planted first. "I had given up, Wendra, on everything. My honor, my home, my future. I was just waiting to fade away. And then you gave me that bread and something in me woke up again. Hope, maybe, or just the memory of what it felt like to be human." "You gave me more than bread," Wendra said. "You gave me a home, a purpose, love. You made me believe I could be more than just a girl trying to survive." "We saved each other then." "Yes." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. "And now we build the rest together." They stood together as the stars came out, two people who had been lost and hungry and broken, now found and fed and whole. The orchard whispered around them, branches heavy with the promise of fruit to come. Warren had shared his home, his name, his heart. Wendra had shared her strength, her hope, her fierce determination to build something good. Together, they had fought for and won a future that stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. In the fall, they harvested more apples than Warren had seen in a decade. They sold them in Milford and 3 other towns, and the money was enough to buy sheep for the meadows and repair the last of the main house. Warren declined the Tribune's offer to return to active service, choosing instead to remain on his land with his wife, building the life they had promised each other. Wendra planted an herb garden like her mother's, and the scents of sage and thyme filled the air. She learned to can and preserve, to bake bread that rose high and golden. Warren taught her to read in the evenings, and she taught him the songs her mother had sung. They fell into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing, work and rest and love woven together. In the spring of their second year together, Wendra felt the first stirrings of sickness in the morning and knew what it meant. She told Warren in the orchard, under the blossoming trees, and watched his face transform with wonder. "A child," he breathed, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "We are having a child. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, pulled her close. "Wendra, I am terrified and thrilled and more blessed than any man deserves to be. A child, our child." Their son was born in the autumn, as the apples ripened on the trees. He came into the world squalling and perfect, with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's green-tinged skin. They named him Weston, and he had Warren's stubborn chin and Wendra's pointed ears, a perfect blend of both of them. Warren held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little one. Welcome to your home." Wendra watched her husband with their baby and felt such overwhelming love she could barely contain it. This man who had been broken and lost, who had shared his last hope with her, now held their future in his arms. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect." Warren looked up at her, his eyes shining. "Thank you for everything, for sharing your bread with a stranger, for staying, for building this life with me, for giving me a son. Thank you." "Thank me." Wendra reached out to touch Weston's tiny hand, felt his fingers curl around hers. "You gave me everything, Warren. A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. I should be thanking you. Then we are even." He kissed her forehead gently. "And we will spend the rest of our lives being grateful for each other." They raised Weston in the orchard, teaching him to climb the trees and pick the apples. He grew strong and healthy, his laughter ringing through the house. 2 years later, Wendra gave birth to a second son, Nalan, who had his mother's easy smile and his father's determination. The boys played in the fields and helped with the harvest, and the homestead rang with the sound of children. Warren never returned to the cavalry, though Reed visited often and kept him informed of regimental affairs. Silas was found guilty and imprisoned for 5 years, his reputation destroyed. The magistrate who had helped him was removed from office. Justice, slow and imperfect, had prevailed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Warren and Wendra stood in the orchard at sunset, watching their sons chase each other through the rows of trees. The branches hung heavy with apples, red and gold in the fading light. The house stood solid and whole, smoke rising from the chimney. The fields stretched out around them, planted and tended, promising next year's harvest. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Staying here instead of going to Greystone?" Wendra leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought of that day on the road, hungry and alone, when she had shared her last piece of bread with a stranger. Thought of all the days since, the work and the laughter and the love that had grown between them. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment." "Good." Warren kissed her temple. "Because I could not imagine this life without you. You are my heart, Wendra. Everything good in my life started the day you shared that bread with me. Then I am glad I was foolish enough to feed you. Gracious enough," he corrected. "Never foolish." Their sons ran up then, breathless and demanding attention, and the moment passed into the comfortable chaos of family life. But later, after the boys were asleep and they lay together in their bed, Warren took Wendra's hand and pressed it over his heart. "Every tomorrow," he whispered. "I promised you every tomorrow, and I mean it. For the rest of my life, every tomorrow is ours." "Ours," Wendra agreed and kissed him in the darkness. Outside, the orchard stood patient and eternal, a promise made wood and fruit. The trees Warren's grandfather had planted had sheltered Warren's father and Warren, and now Warren sons. One day, perhaps, those sons would plant their own trees for children they had not yet met. Faith made wood, love made home. And it had all begun with a hungry girl and a broken man, sharing a piece of bread under an oak tree, choosing kindness when the world had given them every reason to choose otherwise. That single act of grace had grown into this, into a life full of love and work and family, into a future neither of them could have imagined. Wendra had shared her last piece of bread. Warren had shared every tomorrow. And together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Roots deep in good earth, branches reaching toward the sun, bearing fruit for generations yet to come. The orchard would remember. The land would remember. And in the laughter of their children and their children's children, the story would live on. Not of an orc and a human, not of prejudice overcome or battles won, but simply of two people who had loved each other well, who had chosen grace and faith and hope, and built a life worthy of the promise they had made. Every tomorrow together. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.